let's just start with getting a bit of a background without the cannabis side of things. So who is Rose Jackson? How did you get into politics?
Well, I've been in Parliament just over a year. So I'm in the state upper house, which is called the Legislative Council. I'm a Labor representative there. I guess I started my political activism really when I was at uni, at the end of high school. This was kind of around the time that Pauline Hanson was emerging as a political figure on the national stage, and obviously was involved in reacting to her politics of racism and bigotry. Then at uni, I got really involved in the women's movement and became a really kind of active political feminist when I was at university. And then the then Howard government launched one of its many attacks on higher education, and we saw massive increases in fees and a real push to make university less accessible and less affordable. So I sort of became active in terms of equitable higher education policies, and from there I was just a full-blown political activist. I guess there was no going back, and I did study law when I was at uni, and I had this sort of moment where I thought, you know what, I actually don't want to practice the law, I want to change the law. And I had that realization that actually if I wanted to affect the kind of change that I thought was necessary for a better and equal and freer and fairer society, it wasn't really about being an advocate for the way that things currently are. It was being an activist to change that system. And you know, politics can have a bit of a bad name. People think politicians are cynical and ambitious and self-interested. That's not true. Not all of us are like that. Actually, you know, people like me, and there are others, want to use politics, want to use the power that politics gives you to make change for the better. And having been in Parliament for a year, I can see the massive potential of that, but also, you know, the frustrations and the challenges and just how much more work there is to do.
And you said this thing last time we spoke that has stuck with me. I don't know if it's your quote or with somebody else, and it was, you might not care about politics, but politics cares about you. And I feel like that's so relevant to what you're doing. Is that your thing, and can you...
Yeah, it is. I think a lot of people, young people in particular, would say, I don't care about politics. Oh, I'm not political. You know, you sort of end up in a dinner party or a cafe, oh, I'm not political, I don't care about politics. And I can understand why people are disengaged and apathetic about the political process. So I'm not critical of that attitude. It's an understandable attitude, but we've got to challenge it because, as I said, you may not care about politics, but it cares about you so much of the way that we live our lives, whether our housing is affordable, whether we're paid proper rates at work, whether our roads are safe, whether our streets are safe, whether our schools are good, whether if we have to go to the hospital, it's decent. That is all political. That's all politics. So just trying to make people aware of that. I think one of the reasons that people say, I'm not political, I don't care about politics, is they just sort of feel really disconnected from the idea that their opinion on it and any decision they might make about what should happen, they just think, oh, it's irrelevant. So I'm not going to care, because if I care, I'm just going to be disappointed. And again, I try and sort of show people, look, you know, I'm not trying to be myopic about it. It is difficult to have influence over the political process. It's not as easy as just writing a pissed off post on Facebook. It is more difficult, but there are ways that, you know, once you come to understand how important political decision making is to our lives, there are ways that you can have an influence on that. So, you know, don't feel disillusioned and apathetic. And I, you know, try and help people to see the massive power that they have in a way once they can get active and organised.
Okay, that's what we're going to dive into that a little bit more. And you have a podcast now?
I do. So, I mean, I think, you know, one of the things, like, who is Rose Jackson? One of the things I'm trying to do is challenge a little bit the idea of what an ordinary or sort of old school politician might do. So I have, as an example, recently launched a podcast, and the podcast is about trying to show people how state politics in particular is interesting and important. So the first episode was on wage theft, which is a really common occurrence for so many young people, paid cash in hand, under the award rate, no penalty rates. we can do stuff about that in politics. And so that was what the first one was about, trying to empower people on that. I've got one coming up on prison reform. What is happening in our prisons in New South Wales is actually really horrendous. So trying to explain to people why those policies are so bad. And actually the third episode, which will be sort of coming out in a month or so, is on cannabis decriminalisation. So we've got that in the pipeline as well. And that's just all of those things are just about trying to use different mediums, whether it's social media, whether it's stuff like this, whether it's podcasts, to communicate and engage people where they're at, as opposed to saying, well, you know, you have to read the Australian or the Daily Telegraph if you want to know about politics. That's rubbish. So many people don't engage with those platforms anymore. And I want to be where people are and communicating with them at that level.
Okay, and can you just give us the overview of your stance on cannabis and where you're at the moment?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm absolutely of the view that cannabis should be decriminalised. I mean, I'm sort of interested in the decriminalisation, legalisation options. I think my stance at the moment would be, let's get decriminalisation done. And then I think that the obvious sort of next step or final step is a legal regulatory regime. But I do think, as I said earlier, politics can be slow, challenging, frustrating. We're not always able to get everything that we want right away. You know, things take time. You have to bring the community with you. And I think that the first step, and a step that we should honestly take quite quickly, is to decriminalise cannabis use. I think that is not a radical proposition anymore. I think that could be quite quickly and easily done. I mean, I don't think it necessarily will be quickly and easily done, but one of the reasons I advocate for it is because, look, it's quite straightforward. A regulatory regime, that's a bit more complicated. You know, you'd have to figure out how distribution would be done and how licenses would work and how pricing would work and how taxation would work and you know, how health regulations would work. It is a bit more complicated, and for that to happen, you'd really want to bring the community in to be very actively involved in that conversation. I think that should happen down the track. But for the moment, personal use of cannabis should not be a criminal offence, and people should not be going to court for that. Police should not be wasting their resources on that.
Yeah, so the analogy I thought of this morning, this might sound a little bit crazy, but was the reality is cannabis is going to become legal eventually. So we're all on like this ship, right, that's going towards legalization, but I feel the ship is just like all over the place.
Yeah.
You know, and it's because people are not involved at a political level. We don't really have a say. So I feel like the conversation should not be, let's legalize cannabis. It should be, what's the best path to cannabis legalization?
Yeah, I really agree with that. One of the things that sort of surprises and frustrates me is that whenever I talk about cannabis decriminalisation, which I have at various points, I advocated for it in my first speech in Parliament. This is something that I've been on the record on from the very beginning. But at various other points, I've used the opportunity to promote that. And I've always got such fantastic feedback from the community. People emailing me, DMing me, commenting on my social media. There is so much support, as you say, in the community. People want to move in that direction, but it's very disorganised. You know, none of that energy and effort and care that people have is moving politicians. I mean, it's lovely that people would, you know, say good on you, but I'm already there. You know, we have to find a way to bring that energy and interest together to actually move the political process more broadly. And I think that analogy of a sort of like a ship is a good one. It can be slow, it can be blown off course. These processes aren't straightforward. But if people are organised and communicating well, they can have a massive influence on the direction that the ship does go.
What are some possible optimistic outcomes and paths that we can take? Like, is the next step we decriminalise cannabis personal use in New South Wales and then we move on from there toward a rec market? Or what, in your view, is the best?
Yeah, that is, I think, in my view, the best path right now. I try and be open-minded. I want to have a conversation with, you know, community advocates and health experts and law and order representatives as well. So I'm not absolutely set on that, but my view is that decriminalised personal use in New South Wales is the next step that we should push for. It is straightforward, it is simple, could be easily done. So I think that is the next obvious step, and then we move on to a possibly legal regulated market, even in New South Wales or perhaps more broadly. I do know there is interest in other states. Often people will say back to me, yeah, but you're just talking about New South Wales, it should be Australia-wide. Of course it should be Australia-wide. I completely agree with that. But I'm a New South Wales politician. I can't affect what happens in WA or Queensland. I'm not in those parliaments. I can have an influence on what happens in New South Wales, and I'm keen to do that. But I do know that there are people like me in other parliaments, and so some kind of coordinated work across the jurisdictions should also happen.
Okay, so we're going to dive into the steps next that we discussed previously. I just wanted to clarify for people like us in this community here in New South Wales, what do we need to do to push for decriminalisation? Is it a petition? Like we can do a petition with 20,000 e-signatures? Is that?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that you should do is everyone should make sure they're on the electoral roll. And that's no joke. A lot of young people aren't even enrolled to vote. So you've got to make sure you're on the electoral roll. You've got to, decisions are made by those who show up. You got to be in there having your voice heard. You got to know who your local member of parliament is. You got to at least know who is the person that's representing you in this decision. All of that information is really easily available online. You just Google, state electorate Byron, and in this instance, we're in the state electorate of Ballina. It's called Ballina, but it encompasses Byron. And who your local member is, it's Tamara Smith. But everyone's got to know that. Everyone's got to know what electorate they live in, who their local member is, and what that person's position is on cannabis decriminalisation and what they're doing about it. People should feel comfortable shooting an email to their local member of parliament, calling their office. I know people sometimes feel like, oh man, I don't want to do that, or like, that's going to be awkward, or I don't feel confident doing that. But that's what I said. It's not easy, but people have got to step up and actually make contact with their local member of parliament and say, I'm a supporter of this. What's your position and what are you doing about it? So I think that's the kind of basic first step. Beyond that, I think a petition is a great idea. So if we can get a massive petition, that means we can force a debate in parliament. Now, a debate in Parliament is not a law change, but it's a good start. So I think a petition is a really good idea. And then I think from there, we should look to get the cross-party working group that we do have on drug law reform to actually look at some specific legislative propositions. And so that would include myself and some other people from the Labor Party. The Greens are involved. There are even some members of the Liberal Party and other conservative parties that are interested in cannabis decriminalisation. That's why I think that issue is a no-brainer. It's very straightforward. So those are some of the steps that people should take. They should figure out their own political representation and have some agency to express their views. I think getting a petition for the parliament so that we can force a debate, and then I think saying what's the legislative framework that we might put forward to actually address this issue.
Okay, so I want to break down the steps to make it very easy, because I feel what happens, and I know just from a personal view, like I even said to you, it was embarrassing. I had to Google which political party was in power, which was embarrassing, but it's the reality. So I want to break it down to make it really easy, because I feel like cannabis can be almost a stepping stone for people to become engaged with the political system again. And so you talk to us about the first step almost being an education step. And why is our system different is something you mentioned that's important to note. Can we talk about why our system's different and why we might not find ourselves in the same position as like New Zealand with the referendum?
Yeah, well, every political system in each country is different in a way. Unfortunately, because it's not possible to just cut and paste what other jurisdictions have done. We can learn lessons from them, but every political system is different. So The New Zealand, as you mentioned, in New Zealand, they have the referendum coming up. We don't really have that option in Australia. We don't really have a scheme for referendum on law change like that. For the Constitution, we do. We can change the Constitution, but drug law reform isn't in the Constitution. You know, the only other example I could think of would be something like the marriage equality postal ballot. That was a sort of quasi-referendum that looked at law change in that way. But two things I would say about that. One, that was very uncommon, that was very expensive, that's not a model that we've used regularly. And two, I actually thought it was kind of a piece of bullshit. I didn't think that we should have had some sort of citizen-wide vote on that kind of stuff. That's not even, it was great that it got up, of course, but I don't think we should make laws that way. I don't think that's a good path. And as I said, it's uncommon, it's expensive. I don't want people to think that some kind of citizen-wide vote or referendum is realistic in New South Wales or in Australia, because I don't think it is. The path that we have is through our parliaments, through the state parliament and potentially the federal parliament. But those are good paths, they can work. You know, right now they need a push along, we need to build some momentum behind it, but to be honest, the momentum that you would need to get a citizen-wide referendum or vote up would be even more significant, because they're quite uncommon. You know, they cost a lot of money. So the much better path, and in fact the easier path, is to say the parliament needs to make this change.
Okay. And the difference, at a high level, the difference between state and federal, and why that's important for people to know in terms of cannabis decriminalisation and reform.
All of the criminal laws, well, not all, but almost all of the criminal laws in the country are managed at the state level. So police, they're state police most of the time. Prisons, run by the state parliament. So legal issues, law and order, criminal issues, crime issues, they're all almost entirely at the state level. There is a little bit of federal stuff around, you know, high level federal crimes and terrorism and stuff like that. But if you are, you know, busted for having possession of cannabis and you're charged and you go to court, the laws that are being used to prosecute you and punish you are state laws made by the state parliament. So we should have a nationally coordinated effort, but that would require each state parliament changing its laws. This is how we can have decriminalisation in the ACT, but not in New South Wales, because they are state-based laws. And without sort of going into the history of the Constitution, all people need to know is crime, law and order, legal issues are state issues, and that's why we should focus on the state jurisdictions.
Okay, so I've got a basic understanding of state and federal government. I've got a basic I know who my local member is. I reach out to Tamara, for example, and Tamara says, yes, we're pro-cannabis, or another member says, no, I'm not willing to make a statement. Like, what is the value in that, and then what's the next step? What if they say no, we ask why? Or
yeah, so I think, you know, say here in Ballina, Tamara, I'm sure she's going to be pro-cannabis. The Greens Party generally are. But, you know, okay, it'd be great if you could make a statement in Parliament about that. You know, if we can get more and more members standing up and making those statements, that starts getting people going, oh, well, we've got this one over here and this one over here and this one over here. So you have to say, that's great that you're supportive. We need you to demonstrate that support, show that support. If, as you say, you live somewhere else and your state MP goes, oh, no, I don't know about that, well, I think you do need to say, well, we want to talk to you about changing your mind and maybe try and arrange a meeting. Members of Parliament meet with members in their community all the time. So I guess I'd encourage those people to try and get a little group together. Doesn't need to be a big group, 4, 5, 6 people, you know, who care about that issue from that community, and go and meet with the MP and say, here's why we want to change your mind. Here's why you're wrong. You know, not hostile, persuade them. Here's the economic side, here's the health side, here's the social side, here's the impact on me, actually make the case to them. Now look, some of them, some of my colleagues in the parliaments, they're not going to have their minds changed, and that's okay. But some of them might, particularly on the issue of cannabis decriminalisation. I genuinely think a number of them are open. And if they see their community making that effort to get in touch with them, find out their opinion, when they say, oh, I'm not sure, say, no, well, we're going to talk to you about this, we're going to persuade you. I think a number of them might be willing to go, okay, I'm open to it. Doesn't mean they're going to be leading the charge. That's okay, I'll lead the charge, but they'll be open to it. So I do think that's a really important process. If you've got someone who's like, no way, blah, blah, like never, well, the next state election is a few years away, but that's just how democracy works. If you've got someone who's like, nah, forget about it, well, those people in that community should go, well, we need to get rid of this guy or this gal and get someone else in. Again, none of those things are easy, but that can happen. You can say young people particularly they underestimate their power. I guess this is one of the things that I really want to emphasise. If young people have got some old fogey state representative who will not give them the time of day on the issues of whether it's cannabis decriminalisation or climate change or any of the affordable housing or any of these things, those young people can get together and say, no, next state election, who else are we going to get in here? We've got to vote for someone, we've got to organise for someone else. Are we going to say, has Labor got someone decent? Has the Greens got someone decent? Who we got? That does happen, and that can happen. I mean, that's how, Zali Steggall got to be the member of federal parliament for Warringah, because those local people in that community just got jack of Tony Abbott. They're like, this guy, he's like massively against climate change. Our houses are falling into the sea. Massively against same-sex marriage. That community voted 75% in favour. And they just literally went around and went like, we got to get rid of this guy. I mean, we tried to change his mind, didn't work. They got together, they organised, they booted him out. It can happen. So if you find yourself up against someone who's just not in any way actually representing you, then you've got to change your representative. And even a small group, half a dozen people, you build others in, you say to your mates, hey, we've got to get rid of our state MP. He's not in favour of our stuff. You've got to care about politics. Oh, okay. And then they get some mates, and then they get some mates. That's how you build a movement to actually do that stuff. And, hey, the next state election is not until 2023. So on the one hand, it's like, oh, it's going to take a bit of time. But on the other hand, yay, we got the time to actually organise it properly. And these things don't happen quickly. They sometimes happen slowly, but they do happen.
Yeah, it feels like there needs to be almost a shift that's not even, I don't care about politics, it's like I care about my life.
Yeah.
Because they're all the decisions that are being made.
Yeah.
I could go off into so many directions. I just want to bring it back to the decriminalisation thing. So we've had many conversations over the last, I'm going to say 6 to 12 months, and I feel like the problem in the cannabis space, I'm going to say challenge. The challenge in the cannabis space is there's not a clear goal.
Yeah.
So I spoke to a lovely lady through the week who's got a big organisation, Medical Cannabis Users Australia, Gail, and she was explaining to me like decriminalisation might not be the best path because it doesn't really help people access affordable medication, but at the same time, to me it sounds like it makes the most sense to that be the step in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think the medicinal cannabis thing has always been a bit of a challenge, but I think because of that point, which is, well, for some people, it is a purely therapeutic product, and it is important for them and their health, but for other people, it's just recreational. And so when you say, oh well, we're just going to focus on medicinal cannabis, sometimes that can lead to an outcome where it's like, well, sure, if you're sick, if you need it because you're unwell, well, as a health product, as a medicine, you can access it. But if there's nothing wrong with you and you just want to use it recreationally, oh no deal. I think that's a problem. I think that's not we don't want to land there. We don't want to land in a space where recreational users either can't access cannabis or everyone has to go around and say, oh, I got back pain. You know, I don't like that. That's a bullshit system. I mean, cannabis is a very important medicinal product for some people, and so I'm sort of fully in favour of saying, yes, we need to get that system off the ground, up and running, and it is unbelievably expensive. And so I can understand people from that community saying, look, you know, we can access cannabis legally. They can, you know, with prescriptions, etc. But it costs hundreds of dollars. Can't we just focus our energy and attention on making that more affordable? We should do some of that. We should. It is bullshit that you know, basically if you're rich and you've got a good doctor and you can afford a prescription, you can get it. If not, well, you basically still have to buy it illegally. That we need to change that. But I sort of feel in my mind like pushing the decriminalisation broadly removes some of the stigma, moves us closer to a place where it's, you know, it's a regulated market and people can get it from their medical use, or people can get it recreationally, but you know, there's some, you know, oversight of that. I think that pushes us closer to that. I feel if we go too heavy just on the arguments about medicinal cannabis, you know, we do end up in that situation where we lose sight of the fact that, you know, products like, you know, alcohol and tobacco are able to be used recreationally. There's no sense. I mean, there's no medicinal qualities of them at all, to be honest. I mean, they're very harmful. But I feel as though that it just creates more of a divide between medicinal users and recreational users, and actually those kind of divides aren't helpful. We have to try and keep people together, and decriminalisation is, I think, the broadest overall position that kind of gets everyone moving in the same direction.
Yeah, amazing. So it's challenging because the plant is very complex, and then it's also challenging because we have the medical and the rec pathway, which might also be therapeutic for a lot of people.
Absolutely.
I think it makes complete sense that, you know, the elderly lady who can't afford the medicine is a criminal for juicing cannabis leaves to treat her own condition and diseases. Like, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I mean, the medicinal lines are, you know, the lines around medicinal use are very powerful. Like, yes, it is ludicrous. It is ludicrous that, you know, you can have two exact same people with the exact same conditions, with the exact same prescription. They can go to the doctor, they can get the prescription. One of them can afford the $300 a month, so they go and get the legal product. The other one maybe is on a low income, maybe is a cleaner in a hospital, you know, saving us all from COVID. Good on that person, but they're not on a high income. So to get their prescription filled, they go and purchase a product illegally on the black market. They both have the prescription, they're both treating the same condition, essentially in the same way. One is committing a crime, one is not. I mean, this is ridiculous. So we do need to change that. And so there are a lot of things about the current medicinal system that do not work. And I mean, I'm fully in favour of, you know, pushing for that to be fixed as well. But as I said, and look, you know, as I said, you have to be able to walk and chew gum here. I just wouldn't want that to be at the expense of saying it is still fundamentally wrong and unfair that so many young people, particularly Indigenous young people, are being busted and put through the court system for personal possession and use of cannabis. That's got nothing to do with a medical condition. It's recreational use. It just should not be a crime. And so I just don't want us to lose sight of that as well.
Yeah, that's a whole conversation in itself, and I thank you for speaking out about that stuff as well. It's really important. To finish off, let's just focus on the decriminalisation New South Wales piece.
Yep.
What's like, when can this happen? What are the steps we need to take? What are, like, the timelines?
Look, I mean, I want to be realistic with people. I don't know that we will get decriminalised cannabis whilst the Liberals are in power in New South Wales. I just don't see them doing it. And they have the numbers. That's how government works. I don't see them doing that. I mean, I think the best thing people can do right now, particularly if they live in electorates with Liberal Party and National Party members of Parliament, is do that work. Find out who they are. find out what their position is, try and meet with them and change their mind. Let's do that work and build a network and an understanding, you know, across New South Wales of there's 93 members of the lower house. Don't worry about us in the upper house just yet. Everyone find out who your local member of parliament is, find out what they think about cannabis, find out if you can meet with them and change their mind. Let's share all that information so we get a map. Then let's make a call. Hey, maybe enough of these libs and nats have said I'm open to it, and we should then think about, wow, well, let's push the button now. But again, I try and be realistic with people. I don't see the libs doing it. You know, they're not a party I've never seen any one of them publicly speak out. A number of them have privately come to me since I've been speaking out saying, oh, I think you're right about that. I said, well, say something. No. So, you know, I think maybe we do have to wait until the next state election. That's 3 years away, a bit less, 2.5 years away. Oh, I know that's frustrating for people. This is, crazy. This should happen now, but I never try and mislead people. It may be that we need to change the government. We need to get some of those people out and some better people in to replace them. And if that's what needs to happen, well, that's what needs to happen. But I do still think that within the next few years, particularly if there was to be a change of government, we could make progress on it. But let's do that. Let's educate ourselves first and make a map of New South Wales where every politician sits so that, people who like you or others and me, who are advocates know, right, this person, this person, this person. We've got all of that knowledge about the political decision makers. And we can go from there in terms of either changing their minds or replacing them.
Okay, cool. That's a great first step. Short of changing the government, is there anything else that could have a significant impact? Like, is a petition likely to have an impact? Is there a potential to push for some kind of reform that says, even though it's not decriminalised, we'll hold off on charging people until?
Yeah, I mean, I think the obvious ones are medicinal cannabis, because it is currently legal. And so, I do think that we do have, without changing the government, we could make progress on the medicinal stuff. Even the Liberals, I think, would be more open to that. So I think that is a good one to try and do in the short term, even though, as I said, I don't think that's the ball game. I think that there's more potential there. Petition we should do, probably just because it's relatively straightforward, but in a way, that's just a first step on the path of a kind of public campaign. That's got to be a lot broader than a petition. That's got to be, people really getting active on the streets, sort of mobilising, mass email politicians, have mass gatherings, big meetings, that kind of stuff. Like the type of stuff that other social movements have done. People, when they were demanding same-sex marriage, when they were demanding, go back in history, abortion law reform. There are other examples of those kind of mass campaigns, citizen mobilisations for issues. And so that would probably be the thing that we could do to try and build pressure on a government that didn't want to act. You can build pressure. Again, that all takes time, that all takes energy and effort, but that is what we could do. So I think those would probably be the two things. Try and find meaningful, progress points on medicinal cannabis and build our network to pressure the government. A petition is a good step, but only one of many.
Right, so we're kind of like mapping the journey there for the...
We do, yeah.
Wow, thank you so much, and thank you for speaking your truth. I'm sure it must be uncomfortable sometimes, the position you put yourself in to speak out against kind of what the party has said in certain cases. So I really respect and honour what you're doing there, so thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
And how do people get onto your podcast or find out more about you? Or when's the Cannabis one gonna?
Yeah, so the Cannabis one's dropping in probably a month or so. So you can find my podcast, which is called Policy Safari, on Spotify, Apple, iTunes, all the kind of podcast places. So if you're interested in podcasts, check out Policy Safari. But also I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, I'm on TikTok. I'm on all of the social medias because I try and go to platforms where people are, just Rose Jackson. So you can follow me there. and just see some of the stuff that I'm talking about. I mean, I do post stuff about cannabis, but I also post about all of the other issues that I care about as well. So that's a good way to see what I'm up to and get in touch.
Amazing. Thank you. That was great.